Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 97 of the Pantheon Plus Rewind, the weekly podcast for recap and discussion about recent Pantheon related events. We've got a challenging show today, so group up as we go over the most recent Parting the Veil, check to see how much time we'd like to spend solo or in groups, check our weekly schedule, and top it off with some Godseer lore. It might get dangerous this week, so let's bring friends. Line up at the dungeon entrance and await your invite from me, Desrin, or my courageous co-host, Theric. It's time to delve into this week's Rewind. Oh man, Theric. Do you want to pass the coffee? Maybe...
I know, man. I need a little extra coffee this morning. We're recording at a bit of a different time schedule than we're used to, and I think it's thrown us both off a little bit, and we're both trying to manage potentially noisy household, you might say.
Yeah. Yep. I would even say, like, maybe this time frame is just immersing us because since we record ahead of time, it's usually at a different hour, but now it's like we're actually before the rewind hour. So I feel
Yes.
very immersed, and I hope everyone feels it when they listen to us at the premiere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you would think we would be more energetic and caffeinated, but then again, we're also tend to be night owls, I think, both of us. So maybe it'll have the opposite effect. I don't know, but it'll be good anyway, no matter what.
All right. Well, I tried to theme it again this week, and I couldn't imagine it's a more appropriate theme for our weekly tradition, which is shouting out our helpful adventuring party.
Very helpful.
let's get into them. We've got Ziplocs on the Darkmer Rogue, Sparrow on the Elf Ranger, Bounty Code on the Human Wizard, Screech on the Skar Bard, Wikiwoo on the Human Enchanter, Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Theldrin on the Archai Warrior, Xanafel on the Darkmer Druid, Jason on the Skar Beard Lord, Man of Rohan on the Ember Elf Ranger, and Daimlos on the Darkmer Cleric. Thanks again, everyone that joined the party last week. I feel like we got a lot of Darkmer. I just noticed that.
I've noticed that too in recent weeks. People love the Darkmer. Maybe, I don't know what it is. Maybe the story we told last week has really inspired people.
Yeah,
but yeah, lots of Darkmer.
Yeah, or maybe everyone's just tailing along with Holly. As
Oh, maybe. We'll have to do an underwater themed episode at some point.
Oh yeah. But yeah, every week you guys, you show up, and it's just so encouraging to just see you guys' support during the premiere, and we're just always happy to shout you guys out. And as always, if you'd like to join our adventuring party this week, feel free to use the super chat function if you're here during our YouTube premiere, or feel free to hop over to our Patreon. We're here to kind of turn it straight back to the community in whatever way we can, and your support kind of makes it so that we can do a lot of cool things, like episode 100 coming up.
Yep.
But thanks again, everyone. And now that we've got our party, shall we set out? Shall we push on?
We shall. This week in Visionary Realms News and Notes. Okay, so on April 7th, we got another episode of VR's podcast called Parting the Veil. If you aren't aware of it, it's a bit of a new thing where VR is giving us a little more context into some areas of development. This one in particular was all about grouping versus soloing in Pantheon. So Minus interviewed Joppa, and there was some good stuff here. And I feel like this podcast, it isn't really intended to give us like beans or new information, but sometimes that happens. But in the two episodes we have so far, it's been more about affirmations and some explanations as to, how the design they're doing fits into the foundational tenets of Pantheon. So I want to go over what was said with you, Desrin, and I'll get your take along the way here. Let's start by, Minus sort of set the tone. He asked Joppa, the base question, is content still being designed for group play? Or has there been an adjustment to this design philosophy? And Joppa's response was, as you might expect, there hasn't been any shift in their design philosophy. He described group play as being the heart and soul of Pantheon's design, which is good to hear. And, then you get into what that means in a practical sense. So that's basically what this podcast was all about, this episode. Joppa defined what does group play mean, or what does that mean? He said the terms group focused are used, group centric, and we often hear that. And we want to distinguish it, or they want to distinguish it from saying forced grouping, because that's a term that's also been thrown around, right? So does group centric means, and this is the quote from Joppa, and I thought it was good. He said, "A game with a majority saturation of content, you will need a group to overcome." Now, Desmond, before we go any further, let's dig into that definition a little bit, or some of these definitions, because I'm going to give you an honest opinion here, because I do think I get a little bit turned around sometimes when I hear these terms thrown around. And sometimes I do think it's a little bit of VR they just want to avoid that label of being a forced grouping game. It's, where progression is tied to being grouped. But I sometimes I feel like there's a little bit of a contradiction there. And I mean, at its base level, what is progression, right? Is overcoming challenge equal progression? And if that's the case, then progression requires a group. And does your enjoyment of the game, is it defined by progression, right? So if the answer to those questions is yes, you could say Pantheon forces you to group. Now we're gonna break this down and dispel that a little bit here, because I think they did a good job of that on the Parting the Veil. But just on that premise, would you agree with that? Do you think that there's a difficulty and a contradiction at all here?
First off, I like that this is so kind of addressed right in the beginning. I think that was really helpful. But as far as the adjustments, so to speak, I don't feel it's a contradiction. But I do feel like it's way too simplified in general, which happens. This is the internet. No one wants to have a real thoughtful discussion,
right?
So it's always forced grouping, and it's it's
we live in a society of headlines, right? Where everything's a headline, and that's about
exactly. And so in that sense, I don't think this is a backstep or a real. Even saying adjustment, I feel like it is a bit. I'm trying to think of a better word there, but maybe there's not, So I think if anything, the contradiction just kind of lies in how everyone kind of takes the terminology, and they try to define it. Yes. They try to define it, but
yeah, exactly. And that's really where this gets interesting. That's why this podcast I thought was very well received, very interesting and good to listen to, because when they start talking about defining progression. So, Joppa talked about what they're considering the group player experience, the solo player experience, looking at those both together. He spoke at the framework, that they're working from. It really relies heavily, and this is the key thing here, is the open world concept. More, and specifically how the game world opens up to you throughout your time in the game, and that being part of progression. So to connect that to the concept of soloing, he had a really good quote. He said, quote, "We're not building a game where every step you take is going to be a brick wall unless you're in a group." So he acknowledged that might have been the case in the past during testing sessions. And I thought the example he gave, Des, was really good. He talked about aggro acquisition while you're traveling. So running across the world, and a wolf, you grab aggro, a wolf gets on you. If it's group tuned, if everything is group tuned, it's basically game over at that point, right? So as a solo player, discovery would be prohibited, would be blocked off. And they don't want to do that. That's the key thing here, I think. So we get a little more clarity on why they can say it's group centric and not forced grouping. So I think when you really dig into it, it's the scale and the type of progression that matters here. Desmond, your thoughts on that?
I'm sure we'll get into defining that here in a second. But you know,
Yeah.
the example that eventually came up with like the Elden Ring open world. And I'm surprised that we haven't immediately touched on that, you know?
Well, I purposely restrained myself from doing the Elden Ring. Hey, look, Joppa
Well,
loves Elden Ring just as much as
let
I
me
do because it
unrestrain
was
you.
so easy. Please do. Take these cuffs off me.
But what's great is he wasn't like really just, you know, going like, well, you know, Elden Ring, but more using that as like a baseline example of, you know, you can explore pretty freely, especially if you're careful, you know, in the overworld. And I think that was his main point, was that the way that Elden Ring and a lot of open world games are kind of split up is you've got this more openly explorable overworld with a lot of points of interest or dungeons or, you know, more major areas that, you know, okay, I'm not ready for that. And it doesn't necessarily keep you from finding those places in particular because, you know, you can see the entrance but not go in, right? And all that I think was clarified here was that they're not going to tune literally every mob to be group centric or group required, I should say, because if the overworld is tuned to such where, you know, if you aggro a wolf, it doesn't mean absolute death if you're, you know, reasonably close on level. Just kind of goes to say, hey, we're not just going to block you from playing the game. Like, you can explore.
Right.
You just, like, you know, obviously the really cool stuff is you're going to need a group, or you're going to need to be, you know, way beyond the expected levels and requirements. And soloing is going to basically be possible in the sense of you're not going to get stopped.
Right. Yeah. You know, again, so unrestrained now, I will say the way he was talking about Elden Ring, it just was completely music to my ears because I feel what he was saying when I'm playing Elden Ring. It's that idea of, we're not going to put a wall in front of you. The wall is going to be your ability to deal with things here. So rather than saying you can't enter this area until you are level 10, you know, or saying you are not eligible for this dungeon because you don't meet the requirements, like, that's crap. And games that do that are, you know, it's about control. It's about controlling your behavior as a player. And when you take those controls away and you're free to basically, you know, if you want to try it, like if you want to run in to, you know,
I knew you were going to say
or whatever that,
because that's the one. If anyone like follows Elden Ring at all, you see some of the best memes, and they're 100% true. But this is so pertinent to this discussion.
Right. So you want to run in there, go for it. If you're a wretch and you have done nothing in the game and you can get there, you're totally capable of doing that. Now, are you going to be super probably dead in 5 minutes? Probably, but you still have the ability, and maybe you can strategically find a way to do it. So yeah, I mean, it's about design. And this was really speaking my language when he was talking this way about what, you know, the type of content and how what progression means.
Yeah.
So, so he gave a little bit, in terms of, you touched on this, Des, a second ago here. You talked about, like, you know, when does that wolf become less of a threat, or when do things start becoming more threatening, I guess. And Joppa gave a little bit of information about the difficulty curve of the solo experience and when you're going to start to feel it. So, and he cited the first 5 levels being the time when you can really solo effectively, basically even level stuff. But after that, you're going to need to start looking for lower level things if you want to keep soloing. Now, with a couple asterisks in there, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he noted basically, ultimately, solo players will be relegated to areas and content over time that may offer them less experience, lesser items, and lesser rewards. So if you want to see the most exotic, you want to see the high prestige content, that's going to be group content. And the quote was, you know, this is to open up the game to you at its highest level is what you're going to be needing to group for, which is exactly, I think, what we would expect. I mean, does that sound right to you?
It totally does make sense, right? Like if we're talking a modern MMO, I feel everyone has a certain expectation of how much of the world you deserve as a player, without any additional effort. And I do believe Pantheon's going to break that pretty hard, in a good way though, because obviously if there's really cool stuff out there, if we do have this whole range of experience, which that's kind of how I see it, so maybe I should touch on that, is in Pantheon you have the full gamut. You have solo, which feels like solo stuff, which I think is important. First of all, it doesn't feel over aggrandized because it's solo stuff. You're just one person. But obviously, if you get together with other people, you can take on more intense, more interesting, more exotic, as he said, locations and mobs and stuff. It just makes logical sense, you know?
Yeah,
So
it totally does. You know, the thing is, and this comes up a little later, but getting a group and being grouped takes effort and work. You should be rewarded
yes.
for the effort and work putting into getting and being in a group and doing the things necessary to make a group work. Not just the difficulty of the mobs. I'm talking about the social aspect of it. It adds another level of effort required, and you should be rewarded for that.
Yeah, and actually reward was touched on like quite a bit in the Parting the Veil podcast, which I love that reward wasn't centered around you know, like gold or XP, right? Like the experience, I think through their talks is the experience of doing the thing is part of the reward. Not the XP, but the experience of it. And that again rides on the whole to open up the game. Opening up the game was like I would say like the overall theme of this podcast, and it was touched on so much. And part of that opening up is finding barriers at one point and then not finding barriers in the future, right? He made a lot of like Zelda related examples, right?
Yeah, he did. like a bomb on the boulder and the bomb.
Yeah, which I mean, it's great examples, and that's the kind of stuff that isn't tied to a number. That actually feels really good, that has just escaped MMOs for so long. And before we get like too far past this, there was a point where the idea of giving the player the freedom to make that assumption of like, oh man, I'm not supposed to be here. Because when you have that experience at one point and then you go back later and absolutely decimate the place, gosh, doesn't that feel so incredible, right?
I just did that this morning before we started recording in Elden Ring. I went back to an area that used to kill me over and over again, as many places do in that game. But now I'm, more than competent and able to basically slaughter these demi-humans that were annoying in the very first parts of the game. So I loved it. So.
It really adds to the full experience of living in a world, I think, because when you're completely throttled by a number, it takes away from the immersion. It takes away from the kind of reality feel. I think it really strips away the experience when there aren't all of these natural factors, I would say, because the glove, the bomb, like those aren't tied to a number. It's more tied to problem solving, tied to access elsewhere, and that other experience I talked about earlier of like, oh man, I'm not supposed to be here, is so important to an MMO, I think. Because I was thinking about this actually this morning as well. It's funny you say that you just had this experience, because I just had like this particular experience this morning too. I decided to, and I know I'm going to go off all the rails here, but don't worry, guys. We have time. But I decided to load up Mortal Online 2, and I have a character that's still in Haven, as I'm pretty sure yours is as well, right? They've actually updated Haven a bunch since release, and they added a cave, and I'm like, let me go find this cave and check it out. Which you have to find it first of all.
Oh, dude.
Yes. Derek, and this isn't to dote on Mortal, but this is to illustrate what I'm talking about. The cave, man, it's not a little cave. It ended up being a 2-hour delve where I was legitimately afraid. Like, I had my inner monologue was basically going like, oh my gosh, this is freaking awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to be here. Why am I going forward? Why am I going forward? I'm not supposed to be here. I'm going to die. I'm going to lose everything. I'm so deep. I'm like so far in here. My inventory is like full, and I'm just like, I can't. I'm like, I have to go further. Dude, I didn't even get to, I didn't get to the end, or I basically got to this giant black pit, and I was literally too afraid to go into the blackness because there were some like it was giving me hints of like there were these like spiderlings that started to be around, and I was like, okay, I know, and I think I mentioned this, but Mortal has like black pixels, so you can't just turn up your gamma.
Right.
But you go into this. I didn't have a torch, and I'm like, I'm basically obviously the poster child for don't do this. And I finally get to a point, literally like an hour 15 minutes in, where I've just been going down and down and down, and I'm by myself, and I'm vulnerable, and I just see in front of me this black expanse, and I'm like, I've reached the point where I am unwilling to go further. And I could see another like tunnel on the other side of this blackness, and I could not proceed much as my heart wanted to. And so I turned around and I cleared my way back up, and I survived. But it was that feeling of, I am not supposed to be doing this right now. And I ran into another guy on the way back up, and I was like, best luck to you, brother. But yeah, dude, that feeling I feel when Jop is talking about how the world opens up to you, I fully expect if I went down there with another person, it would be a completely different story, and it would be just a magnificent expedition, right? And that's the feeling I'm expecting in Pantheon. All right, there's the sidetrack.
I think I think you just scheduled my Saturday night for me and some others with that story, because that is enticing, and that is something I want to do now. So, that's a great point. And I'm actually going to skip ahead on my notes here to the next point I wanted to make over one, because this is what we're talking about. Because on the podcast, another area they delved into was the monopolization of content by high-level players coming back to solo, like lower level mobs and areas. And Joppa had a few comments on this. He said, yes, you can totally do that. He said, it's one of the examples of the world opening up to you as you grow, as we've just been talking about. So it's important to them. And I think it's important to us as well. He confirmed the way that they're handling this. And one of the strategies is designing multi-level tier areas. So what that means is a place like Halner Cave, going back as a high level player, and there being sections of the dungeon that are at your level. So like, the entrance is level 10 to 20, and then there's like a level 40 area in the back that you'll come back for later. And then the other thing he mentioned is regarding itemization, talking about how it's not going to be done in a linear way all the time. So what that means is, you might get an item at level 10 in the entrance areas of Halner Cave that might still be good for you 20 levels later. Therefore, it alleviates some of that pressure to, for the high level players to come back and necessarily do that because they've already got something that they can use. They've just had it since their early levels to go back and do. So that's it's a good example, and it's something I'm glad that they have a realistic view of this, because I think that that's just the joy of adventuring, is, like we said, coming back and doing an area that was too hard for you before. So that's that. Now
actually,
I want to go back again.
Can I speak to that
Yeah, go
note?
ahead.
Because I think this is actually where I get a little bit fuzzy, on hesitant, I would say, because I don't think what they listed is enough to keep that monopolization at bay. I think having higher level content in a lower level zone, what that actually ends up being is, once there's enough people at the higher level, they'll steamroll the low level dungeon on the way to the high level area, or just while they wait, it's maybe they're waiting for their sixth person, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And we've yet to see the entire scaling of like low level to high level items, so I'm open to seeing how that plays into it. The difference in stats between a level 50 and level 10, who knows right now. But I think what this actually plays out as is not quite to the extent of defeating the monopolization like this. But I do want to note, on the positive side, it does mean a smaller group could come in, or solo maybe even, very far past the levels, and have a chance of doing the content, right? It leaves that door open, at least. And for me, I'm much more a small group kind of person, duo, trio. And I do want to be able to do some content without it being like grayed out, so to speak. Positives and negatives.
Yeah, that's a great point. No, I agree with you. But I one of my favorite things about Pantheon that they've talked about is the mixing of area level ranges in an area. I think that's one of the best things that they can do, because for all the concerns that you have, I think that there's more positives in terms of, like, maybe it allows a lower level group to get to an area because the high level group has moved through, cleared it out. They get to an area that they maybe couldn't get to, or maybe saves them some time. But then the high level group is not interested in that anymore. They're just sticking to the one camp that they've established. And now you've got a synergy going on between level ranges that I think is very beneficial to the social aspect of Pantheon. So it's really actually hitting at the heart of what this topic is all about, is that, there's an interplay between solo or small group and, full group, six person group. Play in the game, which is pretty cool.
I definitely like that there's the mix of levels. I don't want to pick on that, because I do think that's great. I just think, I hope in the future that we see more information about how they're going to mitigate high levels like power farming, lower level areas, especially considering they keep saying that there are going to be lower level items that are very useful. So it's like the incentive is there. So, and that's, players will go where the incentives are. It's a natural progression. So I hope to see more information. I would leave it at that. Like, I like the details we have, but I just don't think it's enough yet to mitigate that.
Yeah. We need more information to make a final conclusion, or at least a reasonable conclusion. Another area that they talked about in the podcast that I want to talk about with you, Des, is the topic of like soloing with being more capable for some classes over others, because this always comes up, right? So Joppa said it's inherent in their class design philosophy that some classes are just going to have better tools for soloing.
Yeah.
Like some classes might be able to just kill things quicker, or perhaps they just recover their resources quicker, right? So, and then they talked about some itemization is going to also feed into that. So maybe some items really enhance solo play, and we can think of plenty of examples of that back in EverQuest and other games where they had an item like, and I wasn't one of those the fungi tunic, right? That was so popular because it allowed, I think, for so much soloing for that class. I wasn't one of those. But basically what Joppa said is there's this matrix of like class skill, player skill, and itemization that creates this template for more adept solo play or even small group, like you say, or duo play. And I absolutely think it's the right approach. And personally, I can relate to this. One of the reasons I enjoy playing a ranger and traditionally is because their toolkit usually allows for a little bit more self-reliance, and that's okay. I'm the biggest proponent of group play you'll find, but I also like to have that like, range where I can maybe do some things solo if I need to. And I can attest that, seeking out items in games that enhance that ability, you know, that's a good idea. And that's something that, although I said the fungi tuna wasn't my thing, there were other items that I think as a ranger really helped me, become more self-reliant at times. So whether that was my epic weapon, whatever it is. But so Desrin, you're a past, you're present and future druid, which is, a class that's known for soloing back from the EverQuest days with your kiting abilities. Is this the right approach, you think, to give players that want to solo that option?
Okay, so again, I just love how this question was answered initially in the podcast. And so I of course, as usual, I hope everyone does, listen to the full podcast. It's not too long. And the question's presented to Joppa as like, are you okay with some classes being able to solo better than others? And Joppa's just like, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I am.
and he just kind of makes the case that, like, of course. And I just, not to be like demeaning or anything, right? But as a druid, which I've played druids in different games that have been both excellent and terrible at soloing, and in different ways too. Because in Vanguard, for example, druid was an incredible kiting, especially for single mobs. And in EverQuest Online Adventures, I distinctly remember trying to power level, quote unquote, by keeping aggro on like an entire camp of mobs, lower level, of course, and just healing. And I would keep aggro while like a lower level group like kills the mobs with no danger. And I don't know how accurate that would be to regular EverQuest, but that was my EverQuest Online Adventures druid, and I would have not considered the druid a great solo class in EverQuest Online Adventures. And the idea that other classes are going to be dramatically better at soloing doesn't bother me at all. I especially people that are going to be playing the game a lot, I feel it's actually kind of fun to have your solo alt. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people have solo alts, right?
Yes, that's a great way of describing it. Your solo alt, and I think that's going to be a big part of Pantheon. I think because it's almost like another type of, another way of playing the game. It's like an alternate game mode.
Yeah, and I'm sure that character would turn out like quite different to one that is group focused, right? The items you go for, the spells you go for, eventually.
Yeah. And I think that's fine too. I think because I can see some people saying like, oh, I don't want to have an alt. I want to have everything on one character. I don't want to create an alt just to have better solo ability. It's like, I would disagree with that. I would say, I think it makes the game more, to use a Joppa term, more robust. But that's my opinion. I know some people might disagree with that.
I think that the general gist to me, though, is if someone's a completely new player, let's say they've never played an MMO before, and they're like, I'm going to play Pantheon, which I'm sure that will happen. Maybe not like a majority of the people, but I'm sure that'll happen. As long as when they're choosing their class, there is some vague indicator that the class might be a little bit better at holding their own by themselves.
Yeah, that's
because with a long form game like Pantheon, I think the disappointment would come when you pick a class and you end up not being able to group very much, and you find out that your class is like one of the worst for for soloing, right?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm a little bit torn on that one because as much as I think it should just be like a natural learning experience rather than having something that sort of tells you right off the hop, what your
Oh
class
yeah.
strengths are and what kind of archetype they potentially could be. I'm a little bit like, I expect that will be there, but I don't know. I'm
Well,
kind of
yeah,
torn.
I don't expect like a rating system or anything like this is a
Right,
level
yeah,
5
rating system,
for soloing.
yeah.
Um, but I just more mean maybe flavor text and stuff like that. But like some of it's obvious to us that have played MMOs for a long time. Like we know the things like obviously kiting is a big one. Like drain tanking is another one. I think of for like a solo strategy. But we might make fun of someone that's like, oh yeah, I really want to play like, I don't know, a shaman or something, or like, a healer or support class. And I want to play solo. And we'd be like, that's not gonna work. Your class inherently,
It's going to be tough.
your in class inherently requires a group, but I just got to be clear in that it's obvious to us. It might not be obvious to everyone. So there probably should be some way of indicating that.
Discerning, yeah, sure. Yeah, without any kind of prior knowledge. It's true. I mean, it's hard for us. Sometimes we do lose the experience, the beginner experience mindset. And
some people just like the
fantasy
of it, right? Like, I mean, I think that's a big thing about Druid. It's just like a lot of people have this like mystical fantasy of a Druid kind of persona, and
it has nothing to do with their ability to solo or not, right? Yeah. So cool. Yeah, no, that's a big thing and a good discussion as well. Now, the last thing from the podcast that I want to comment on here is something that they mentioned, and I think it again demonstrates VR's awareness about why group-centric MMOs sort of gone away, and that's being unable to find groups. It's really, in my opinion, like the $1 million question, and a huge part of what is going to either enable Pantheon to be successful or, risk it at being a failure. Because when Joppa talked on the podcast, he noted that in pre-alpha testing, a lot of the testers confirmed the grouping aspect is what they enjoy the most. And some of the strongest feedback they received was how bad it felt when they couldn't find the group. Right. Yeah. So he said, people, they want people to be able to experience Pantheon regardless of, even when that happens. So he talked about the grouping tools and being how essential they are. Now, here's where my critique of this episode is going to come, because this is a question that's lingered forever and has never really been answered. Like, what are those tools? What does it look like? This conversation leads to this point every time, because they just haven't given a really clear description of what their group finder is going to be. Or how people are going to not group finder. Don't get upset but it just, because we don't know, it's not going to be just looking for group in zone chat. That's not how it's going to work. So we just continue to speculate on what these tools are going to be. And I just think this would have been the perfect moment to unveil. And I'm using that term, pun intended, this information. They could have said, like, here's what we're going to do to implement this. Here's what we're doing. And here's our mechanics. And I'm kind of shocked that they would actually bring up this topic and not have that sort of something ready to go with that there. So yeah, a little critique there. Am I wrong about that, Des? Do you see that?
Well, first of all, when you just said, like, they want to make sure that, if someone solo can play their game or etc., that sentence, I know, just like sets off like so because like people assume that means, oh, well, we're going to make it so that a solo person can do everything, which fortunately they addressed prior, right? But when they're talking about the tools, it's so funny because they're like, there are so many good examples that we can draw from, where, they made it very clear that the LFG tool is going to be a big focus. They know that is going to be a major component of making sure that people can find each other efficiently as possible. Because obviously, like, that is going to be a major key in keeping Pantheon going in the pickup group.
Huge. Absolutely.
But yeah, they don't mention it. And, I'm just going to say, if they're not given details, it's because they don't have them. Or finalized.
Unfortunately, I've come to sort of that realization as well, is that, I think that it's just one of those things that just haven't nailed it down yet, and they don't know themselves. So I don't know. I really hope they get that right. I've said that before, and I'll keep saying it because I think it's super, super important. And like you said, Desert, the community hears we want everyone to be able to play, whether they can find a group or not, definitely raises those hackles for people. And there's a lot of community, there's a lot of fear about Pantheon being overtuned for solo play. And that's a very reasonable concern in my opinion. And it's based off what we've seen in modern MMOs. It's the last 10, 15 years of MMOs. That's what's happened. So here's what I'll say though, because Choppa did talk about this, and if his explanation didn't assuage your fears, I don't think anything will, because he really kind of went off, which is kind of unusual for him, because he doesn't really he doesn't want to speak negatively about other MMOs, but he did in this case. He said they've just extremely solo designed how modern MMOs are down to the core. Like, just everything is not even like a preference for soloing. It's like it's built to be soloed. It was good to hear him express some of that frustration and some of those same sentiments that we in the community have, because we've said it time and time again. This is our frustration with modern MMOs. So if you're listening to this and you listen to the Parting the Veil, I don't think you can walk away saying you're concerned about Pantheon becoming a solo, overtuned for solo play, because as usual, Joppa gets it. He just gets it. So I was just reassured by that, and I just think we just want to see the next step taken.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so what does that look like now?
Yeah,
right?
I think that's why the LFG tool is coming before alpha. Obviously, they're listening to the feedback of the pre-alpha testers, and they're not clueless. And I wouldn't see an LFG tool as being something that's like an HDRP. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not.
No, like
it's a lot smaller,
much easier. Yes, it's a smaller
and a lot more reactive, I would say. Like, they could change it based on pre-alpha testing requirements, like things that people want. So I don't blame them for not having details on that. I think it's fine. It just, I know people will hang on that note a little bit of like, hey, now we have a lot of sentiment, in this whole podcast. Mm-hmm. It's basically all sentiment except for the detail about how, like, open world design, to clarify that, like we're going to make sure that you're not just raffle stomped by random wildlife.
That was pretty much the beat of the thing.
Everything else though is more or less sentiment, and we need to move past that. That'll be my criticism as well. So kind of aligning with you on that is we're getting into a place where some of the details are going to have to start coming out, either visually or in words, preferably visually, right? But that's my take, I guess.
No, and I think we're on the same page about that. So that's really well taken. So that's the podcast that the Parting the Veil. Is there anything else, Des, that you wanted to bring up from this that caught your eye, or anything else you wanted to discuss?
I'm going to steal a quote from Joppa again. I think I've done this a few times now. That's actually not on purpose.
He's a very quotable guy. He's super quotable.
It's just, I feel like quotes are just great ways to like wrap up segments.
I agree.
So here's the quote. It's 2022. We've got a lot of history behind us. We've got a lot of examples of very, very well done, well built social tooling that can allow for much deeper connection between players and the ability to create those relationships and do that on their own terms. Specifically referencing LFG tool, but I think to me it means a little bit more than that. Of their target is not just to allow players to do content; it's more than that, and that is a big sentiment for Pantheon as a whole that I'm going to ride all the way to the heavens or the grave. Also tameable mounts. Okay, should we move on now?
I love that you threw that in there. I wasn't even going to say it. I did it last time because they did the same thing as on the first episode of this podcast. They threw this little thing at the end. I'm like, okay, come on, man, more info. I don't know. I just a little teaser. Always leave them wanting more, I guess, is their philosophy.
It's so random, though. It's so random.
It is so random. Like, what does it have to do with this? I'm not sure what it has to do. Like, is your mount or is something you tame? Is that considered a group member? Are you a duo if you are you and your thing? I know. Don't go down that path.
I think for now it's just like something that he could throw out because he's probably excited about it. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
that could be the
Just
podcast, and
exactly. But we need to know, like, we know what VR said about grouping in solo play, but what does the community think about this? And that was actually one of their questions from earlier this week on their official Twitter. So let's get a few responses from the community, what they thought about this. Because the question that Pantheon asked, or VR asked, was how much time would you say you spend soloing versus grouping in MMORPGs like Pantheon? Please explain your answer. So, for example, guild, work, family time, friends, that kind of thing. So I wanted to highlight some of the responses. And as always, I'm trying to capture a range of different viewpoints here and showcase the community's opinion. So let's dive right into it, and we'll go back and forth on these, Des. The first one is from Bogus Meat Factory, aka the Literal Pixel Podcast on Twitter, which is a crazy good name, but I should actually check out their podcast. They said 90% grouped and 10% solo. That 10% typically is doing solo activities such as crafting, writing in-game notes and journals, and player housing. I actively seek other players, be it random folks I come across or friends who want a small-scale co-op experience. It's fantastic. So I think, Des, this speaks to really what we were saying earlier about how people define progression, like all those little things are also progression,
I agree.
So
I agree that everything you do in the game is progression of some kind. Some of it might have nothing to do with the game, but it's some kind of progression, right? However, the 90-10 split, and I might end up having to do this a few times, but no, there's no way. No, I don't think anyone that plays an MMO, regardless of how group-centric it is going to be spending 90% of their time grouping. I think that's an ideal ideal thing. Not to like super call this person out, but like I think that's a very pie in the sky kind of like.
The ratio is too ideal. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I really can only speak for myself, and it's definitely like too much. It's higher than my ratio would be, but I do think that there's a part of the community that is like, if the bell curve, I think it's pretty further towards the middle of the bell curve than maybe what you're thinking. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
I just know you spend a lot of time in town, man. Like, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm picking hairs, like totally. But like, I just think it's like, oh man, this is what I imagine it to be. But if you like actually looked at the time split, I bet it would be so much closer to like 50-50.
Oh yeah, no way. No, it's definitely minimum. It's like 75-25, I think, for most people who want an MMO like Pantheon. But I digress. I don't know.
That's fine.
The next one is from somebody who's probably got the best name I've ever seen on Twitter, and their name on Twitter is /played, and it's @/played, which is awesome. So I want that name. They said if I could group the whole time, I would, except for minor chores. I love adventures in even a small party versus solo. However, the days of sitting in town for 3 hours shouting LFG were solved by WoW, and they're all rich for that reason. So solve that, require groups, you win. That's their 2 cents. And this is like such a great point. It's what we were talking about already a little bit, but I totally agree. One of the overcoming one of the main barriers to grouping is what's going to make, Pantheon a success or failure, and making it, how to keep it personal without making it automatic or impersonal, I think is really where the rubber meets the road. So really good point by /.
Yeah. And I think this is kind of how I would express that sentiment, is like, if I could, I would, kind of a thing. Yes. Right. And I wonder what they're getting at with the whole, like, it was solved by WoW kind of a thing. Because if we're talking the group finder of WoW, I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I can't speak from a place of knowledge because I wasn't a WoW player, to any real extent. Yeah. So I don't know the systems, but it sounds like they're attributing really, WoW's massive amounts of success to something they did with finding
Which is
groups
very
and grouping
interesting.
them.
It's not the
It was
take that
really
I
key.
usually would get from WoW folks saying like why it was popular, you know. So I'll take
Yeah,
that
I
from
don't know.
that as being like really interesting. Like, huh.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, leave us a note in the comments. Like, what do you think? Was that one of the reasons that WoW, was so successful? Is because the way they approached,
Yeah,
finding groups. So at least early WoW, not opposed to not like
yeah,
recent
yeah.
WoW. The
Here, I'll grab the
no,
next
go
one.
ahead. Go
I'll
ahead.
steal it from you, man.
I totally forgot we were alternating. That's my bad. Sorry about
Therek's
that,
like
man.
you've talked enough, man. Like,
I
um,
have way too much.
so the next one's gonna be Glory 0714, and they say, I usually do a lot alone. Part of the reason I want to play Pantheon is because I want to get better at doing group content. And man, I love that sentiment.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
people that like are uh honest about, how they play their games, but seeing Pantheon as being a potential way to change their play style. Oh my gosh, I hope we get more people like this in the community. Like
100%. It speaks to me of somebody with an open mind and somebody who's open to new experiences. And it's also, like we said earlier, it's a good reminder that not everyone has had a group-centric
yes.
MMO experience before. This is going to be new territory for some people. And I'm going to actually read another tweet here that I included in this group because I thought it was sort of a similar thing. This is from Kenji Budo at Kenjington on Twitter. And they said, I don't have much experience with MMORPGs like Pantheon, but I would like to mostly spend my time in groups. For me, solo content is things like crafting, gathering, checking the market, traveling, or killing weaker enemies. It's not for efficiency, but just for fun. And they said, yes, traveling is content for me. Change my mind.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Kenji Budo. That's it. Like progression is also knowledge. What's my knowledge of the land? What's my knowledge of the world? And it's not just about looking it up on a wiki somewhere. It's about traveling there and seeing it and looking at it and hearing the sounds and seeing what mobs inhabit that area. That's progression.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Like I don't think I've seen this person before. Maybe you have, or maybe my memory's just bad.
No, I
but
haven't
like
either.
this is actually giving me so much hope for like the future of Pantheon and the people that are like potentially so interested in this kind of a game that maybe either haven't found it yet or have been told it's not going to happen, seeing that it's progressing and giving their take on how they would play it and having that take actually align with what the game is offering, like going to deliver, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm actually improved in my mood from reading these tweets.
Well, it's such a hidden factor that we don't think of these folks who have never had this kind of an experience before, and like the kind of what they can expect, what's in store for them is so it just brings joy, right? Like it just makes you like, wow, you're in for something you've never seen before. It's gonna be awesome.
Now
I'll take the next one.
I figure
because this
you
one's a
want
little
to get
different.
this one. And I'll just lean back in my chair for a second.
Taking it easy. This is from Sean Hamilton, and they said, I solo. Less of a chance that I ruin a party's night for having to go AFK. I think game development should be created in a way that encourages grouping for specific bosses or loot, but also allows players that prefer soloing a path that doesn't punish them for doing so regarding leveling. So, like I said, I want to include a range of opinions, and this is obviously on the very more friendly solo side of things. I don't know if Sean's being sarcastic there about ruining a party's night.
I don't think it is,
actually, when you think about it. No, the more I think, the more I read it, the more I didn't think it was, because I actually think it's a legit point. It's one of grouping comes with a sense of responsibility, to be honest, and that can be off-putting for some people. I mean, I understand it. It's a less casual way of gaming in that sense, for sure. So, like we talked about earlier, it's not as easy as just going out and running around killing stuff by yourself. But that's to be expected. And again, the rewards that are going to come along with that are going to be commensurate, right? So I think that he makes a good point, and I want to acknowledge that. But I also don't want that to be a legitimate barrier for people, and I want to encourage people like myself as well. When I say this, I speak to myself and saying, don't worry about that kind of thing. Just try it. Just go for it, right? the other key thing I want to point out here is he uses the word punishing, you know, and that word gets thrown around a lot in terms of punishing the solo player. Well, what about group centric players? You know, we've been punished over the years by solo MMOs. I really think it's time to broaden this perspective, and I expect you might have similar sentiments here, unless you're just relaxing in your chair. And don't
No, I would love to comment on this because it actually speaks directly to, I mean, basically since I've been playing MMOs as a kid, because you know I'm younger than a lot of this community. It's true, and as a kid, you know, I was playing with folks that were new families or whatever, and they had just born kids, and they would have to AFK middle of the dungeon a lot. And you know what?
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's okay.
Like if you're playing with folks that are gonna trash you for, you know, having to AFK to like grab your kid, dude, there are plenty of people out there that are gonna give you grace for that and joke about it and have fun with it. And like, I get the anxiety behind it though. I know a lot of people that are in this place where they don't want to play with others because they know they're going to get pulled away, and they feel like their inconvenience is like ruining others' experiences. Right. And like, I totally get that, and know tons of people that are like that. And seeing this like stated in the Twitter response actually kind of like set me off a little bit, because like I want to chase all my friends and be like, dude, I don't care. Just play with me.
Yeah, right.
Like and it ends up kind of being fun. Like, you know, oh, you're gonna go get your kid. Okay, I'm gonna go make a sandwich, or whatever. It's all about just being on the same page as far as pacing. And when we tie this back to the LFG tool, I think this might actually tie in for once in pace of play. Maybe that is part of the consideration of, hey, I want to power through this content versus we're going to take our time. You know, just having that at the offset when you form the group is wonderful, right? And my
really
and also idea. I love that you say less casual. But Sean, dude, I hope you get to play Pantheon, and I hope you're super surprised by the amount of patience and grace that people have just to play with you, man.
Totally. Yeah, well said. The next one, a couple more. So the next one comes from Jason Stockwell. You know what? You read this one. I took the last one.
I was just gonna like shut my mouth for the rest. Just
like caffeinated, the caffeine's not working anymore. Apparently it's worn off.
So this one's going to be from Jason Stockwell, JStock37 on Twitter, saying, I love strategic solo grinding, peeling off mobs to slowly reach a guarded area, using all my abilities optimally. It's just fun. I like grouping with players too, but I like the option to solo while I wait, or just for fun, or if my goal is gathering, etc. Hope it's possible. I should be able to slowly kill a bear my own level, and I should have some abilities that are for soloing flexibility. Maybe I need to kill just one more mob, or maybe I'm exploring an area and can't find a group that wants to do what I want to do. And I think this kind of aligns with what VR is saying. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe not the even con thing, right? I mean, maybe in certain circumstances, you know, post level 5, but I think this does line up. I think this is pretty good.
Yeah, this is what I was sort of referencing a little earlier, and I said the game within the game. You know, it's like the challenge of strategically soloing is super fun. I can't tell you how many memories I have of, you know, hitting a snare on a mob in EQ and then plinking it and running, and then waiting for that, you know, as soon as that snare would break, I was like, oh, you know, got to get the next snare on, and then finding environments or places where I could really do that with an advantage. You know, it's just tactical, and I like that, and I think a lot of people do as well.
Yeah, that's actually just having this go on in Project Oregon, where I needed to kill this specific, you know, dungeon mob actually, but it's not like one of the big dungeons. But I needed to gain favor with the NPC, and I had to be so freaking careful to only pull like one at a time. But if I was really careful, you know, body pulling, and some of those spaces for body pulling are like centimeters, like,
Yeah, it's pretty
and,
tight
but I was
quarters.
having so much fun with it, as I was going through super carefully. When you get success in that, you feel like you just went through a massive, like, I don't know, jumping puzzle, and you like didn't make any mistakes, like that's kind of the similar feeling I
Yeah.
get to when you can go through and, how did they put it? Strategic
Strategically or
solo grinding.
tactically.
Yeah. I love that.
Yes. It requires a precision that I think is very
Yeah.
satisfying. So, okay, so the last one here is from Agile, and they said games like WoW Classic were addicting to people because it unknowingly forced community and socialization. I think gating a good portion of content behind forced grouping is overall a positive experience for the game versus the disengaged solo player that most MMOs have become. So, yeah, I don't know. I think the idea here is just giving confidence to VR to be bold in their design, and to be brave about it, and understanding that, and people maybe don't necessarily know what they want. They think they know what they want, but sometimes you got to just trust in your instincts that people are going to like something that maybe doesn't seem popular or doesn't seem like it will be something mass appeal. But I think a lot of MMOs fall into the trap of just playing it safe because they know the solo experience is one that, people aren't going to gripe about. And even if it's ultimately unsatisfying, it's a safer route. So
Yeah.
good,
I think that's right in line, man. I think you said earlier, like, we have enough, we have enough solo MMOs. Like, if anything,
Yes,
they should be group centric just for the freaking sake of not just have something different for once, right? And like the hope is that group centric doesn't shut down a bunch of people that would love the game. And I think maybe that's what they're trying to solve with the whole narrative. To say like soloing is technically possible. But it's interesting that this is again tied to WoW, right? Like,
yeah. Well, it just sort of brings us full circle, right? Brings us back to where we started, where, they have to explain this and try and get it across that you will enjoy this, or, you will be able to enjoy Pantheon no matter what your preferences or your style for gameplay. Just trust in VR, right? They'll get it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've been talking about this for an hour, and we're gonna wrap it up there. So let's quickly do a quick note. Again, reminder for our Pantheon Plus folks. I'm going to be like a broken record here for you Rewind listeners to get your Rewind 100 messages in as soon as possible. Again, you've only got until April 27th, which is 3 weeks away at this point, but still going to come quicker than you hope. You can email them, you can DM them to us, so don't delay. You can tell whatever you want. Just tell Desrin how much you enjoy his hype killing nature, or, maybe give your top 3 reasons why elves are the best Pantheon race, or I don't know, share a personal story about that time at band camp actually, no, don't do that one. No, not that. Anyway, it's really easy. Pull out your phone, take a voice memo, share it. So why not, right? And you can win a Pathfinder pledge when we do episode 100. So there's an incentive there. If you want a full description of the contest or the event, I guess, check the announcements in our Discord channel and join up. So, and then I'll wrap it up with our content schedule this week for Pantheon Plus. On Monday, Drax streaming his Midnight EverQuest Adventures again. On Tuesday, we're playing Project Gorgon, and we're going to have a video up earlier in the day talking about what we like about Project Gorgon so far. And Wednesday, Sparrow's streaming Lord of the Rings Online on her Twitch channel, 9 p.m. Eastern. Thursday is the big dev stream for the month, so that'll be fun. And we've got Pantheon Plus U afterwards with myself, Drac, and Nathan Napalm to break it all down. Friday, Redbeard Flynn has the EverQuest update coming on his YouTube channel. And then on Saturday and Sunday, CryptFox is doing a charity tournament. He's streaming on his Twitch channel, Dead by Daylight, for charity, so that's for a good cause. And that's the content for the week of April 11th through the 17th. And it's also an hour of VR news and notes.
The Pantheon community is full of cool projects, new people, and things that are just worth sharing. What's this over here? Look at that. So let's see what we can find in this week's Community Spotlight. All right, we're going to jump straight into the Community Spotlight since we covered a lot of ground with the discussions already. But funny enough, I've actually only got one thing to highlight this week. So I know a lot of our community, in spite of things, did follow the launch of New World last year. And if you followed that, you watch YouTube, like, a lot of folks probably do when they're catching up on MMOs. You probably remember a certain creator named Sir Medieval, who was, I would say, probably the top quality content creator during that time. He just always had really well scripted, edited, super clean videos about development. He would get into lore.
Yeah, I was gonna say he was one of the few
actually
people that
did the lore.
like New World lore. Yeah, I really enjoyed that stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, even eventually did some guides. Like, I wouldn't say he's like one of the big MMORPG channels out there, but since the launch of New World, he's definitely branched out. And one of the things that he kind of branched out to this last week was Pantheon. So a few days ago, he dropped a kind of like review for Pantheon, as in, like, it was like a quick primer of like just the general gist. And so some of the info was a bit outdated, I noticed. But as expected, it was very clean. It was, I mean, I would say it was a good video in spite of not maybe being completely current. Like, have you watched it yet?
I did. I watched it this morning, actually. And yeah, it starts off with a lot of older footage for sure, like one of the earliest demos that we've ever seen. But then he does get into the more recent stuff with the HDRP footage and that kind of thing. So I felt it was balanced out by the end of the video, where it was like, more current stuff.
And it's not the first time he's mentioned Pantheon, but it's been a long time. And so one kind of, fun thing is, like, at this point, it's hitting a solid 10,000 views right now, which, to put into perspective, is actually like more than twice the views as the recent Parting the Veil, like the official official video. And it's about as many views as the last dev stream VOD even. And that's, only a monthly thing. And so, I don't know, man, I'm just really excited to see.
It's good for Pantheon. It's definitely a good thing. Again, this is a little preview of, I think, what we're going to see as we get closer to alpha, beta launch. You're going to see these bigger channels start paying some more attention, and expect to see this kind of attention given to the game.
Yeah, and honestly, and maybe I'm just fanboying a bit here, but I'm just really happy that out of all the content creators, like, he's one that is looking at this, because I couldn't think of anyone else outside of our community already that I would be like, man, I hope they cover Pantheon, because I just think this is like perfectly in his wheelhouse. Yeah. And he's such a good guy too. Right. I don't know. he's a very nice guy. And so, really exciting.
So go check it out. Yeah, leave a comment. Let him know about the community. I know, Des, I saw you were in there with the comments, and Basgrim got in there in the comments. And it's just good to get these content creators that aren't as connected, bring them into the fold a little bit, and sort of say, like, hey, you're absolutely welcome to, be connected to us. And like, we want to connect with you, so it's just fun.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, I mean, there's a few, comments in there, but generally, there are folks that I haven't seen from the Pantheon community that are in his comments that are like, oh yeah, I remember this game. And I, I feel like that's the general gist that we're going to be seeing. And, if they have, stuff to show for it, it's going to be really captivating as the word gets out. And so it's just kind of a preview of what's to come, I think. And again, I'm happy that of everyone, it's Sir Medieval. I hope more information gets out there. I love that there's at least a good amount of positive sentiment, and let's just see where it goes from here, right?
Yeah,
but yeah, that's our sole highlight for this week, and that's going to be it for this week's Community Spotlight.
Sit back and relax. It's time for The Lore You Know. Okay, so in the March 2022 VIP Roundtable, Jan Gerhardt, Pantheon's lead writer, talked about the Skar deities, the Nine God, and how it's one of the more unique deities of the races of Pantheon. He said the Nine Gods' antagonists are the Nine Hates, and they create an opportunity, they give dynamic and create an opportunity for the Skar. On a side note, Jan described the Skar language as being hard to decipher. He said it's a lot of screeching and it's more guttural in nature. He said it's an expression of emotion with copious gesticulation. The way he described it was being they sound more like an animal than a sentient creature. But don't worry, I'm not going to be reading the lore in the Skar tongue, so your ears aren't going to bleed, and I'll try to keep the gesticulation to a minimum. But let's learn about the Skar and their deities in this week's Lore You Know. What truth can be grasped about a race that keeps no written record of its past? The futile search for knowledge regarding Terminus's most recent arrivals had been compelled more by concern than curiosity, until the elves stole from Skargel one unfortunate informant, a young Khajian slave named Baknoi. Her testimony has borne scrutiny and the passage of time horrifyingly well. It was a lens that helped burn through the fog of myths and madness that attends these awful beasts. Her broken, translated words piercing a veil of fear and assumption. The peculiar sovereignty, Deshoth, consists of 9 personalities at once. Or perhaps 9 separate beings in one accord. There's evidence of both. In that age, there was no Skar, but a race known as Azajan. Once nomadic, the lands the Azajan inhabited on Deshoth were not their own, and they bartered for it as a mercenary nation, leasing their bodies to the dominant military force in the region, known as Fasok. This name endures among the Skar as something of a harsh slur or profane rebuke, involving immediate retribution and bloodshed. For generations, this treaty caused the tidal Azajan population to wane beneath Fasok's campaigns as if they were moons. Lean years saw the Azajan retaining less and less of their freedom, descending into pure slavery to Fasok. Yet, in this service, the nation thrived, enforcing the mandates of their oppressors with stark brutality, delivering savagery upon the peoples onto which they were loosed. The familial ties within the Azajan competed for scraps of their owner, like a nation of abused, vampiric hounds. If any fault can be found in their service, it was that their effectiveness was too great, their havoc too primal. Beyond this trade, the Azajan had no ambition, for war was the same whether slave or free. Fate would have been gracious to grind the Azajan into dust in that era. Instead, a priestess of the Nine God altered their collective curse forever. A servant of Perish in the Nine, neither her original name or race have survived on record. What is clear, however, is that her aim was to unleash the Azajan from slavery into a nation of warriors under her dominion. The priestess's first act of liberation was vengeance upon Fasok, which left the kingdom unrecognizable and birthed the Azajan legacy of ruination. Drought, famine, and devastation attended every gain, for there was no principle of their conquest, not even retribution, only to consume. The whole of Deshoth would have been eaten away in the wake of the Azajan onslaught. Thus, the Nine God interfered. Its delivery was swift, chaining the apostate priest of Perish for 1,200 years to the Azajan, a century for each nation the campaign destroyed, including their own. From the Azajan, the Nine God took the ability to reproduce, though their inert genders would stay intact. As a sign to all who would encounter the banished race, the bones in their face and skull would be pushed through the skin, marked as heinously as the death they sowed across the realms. The Nine God renamed the Azajan the Skar, sealing the wound of their sins for all time. Upon the priestess, the Nine God lay the greatest humiliation, transforming her into the lone reproducer of the Skar, with an ever-pregnant womb like that of a common colony of insects. From that day forth, she would serve as both the queen and the mother of her violent offspring. The Nine God gave her the name Avarish, calling out the black-hearted lust for consuming she imparted to the Azajan. In the landfall event on Terminus, the deified Avarish perished, though 7 Skar were pushed from her womb before she died. It is assumed by some that her death annulled the Average curse, as those 7 Skar were able to produce offspring, as have their descendants. Whether or not this supposition is correct, the population of Skargul is robust. The region itself is miserable to the eye, profane to the nose, and a tragedy to the land upon which its inhabitants have desecrated. A monolithic fragment of Deshoth, the aforementioned Dead Shear, towers into the terminus clouds, the lone topographical feature and a marvelous silhouette that terrifies in the light of the day. On the ground, the roots of Azizhan's slave clans are still alive, breeding a chaos in Skargul like an asylum where the prisoners are their own guards, and sometimes eat them. This culture of figurative and literal cannibalism has kept the Skar threat subdued far better than any external force could have hoped, and will likely do so for many years, if the Avarish is truly in Death's Keep. And that is the lore you know. So, episode number 97, now a thing of the past. As always, I want to thank you, Desrin, for all your hard work. I know it was challenging for you this week. I'll just leave it at that.
There we go, bringing it full circle. Yeah, this was very free-flowing this week. I hope our audience is okay with that.
Yeah, I hope so too. We went a little long. I thought that the grouping versus solo stuff was really important to dig into this week. I hope everybody's okay with a little bit of a longer conversation there because I think it was needed. And as always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Don't forget to don't forget to send in those voicemail messages to us for episode 100 and to check out our social media channels, our Discord, all that good stuff. So I think we'll leave it there. And until next time, cheers, and we'll see you then.
See you then.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at Desrin Does also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.